She was 22 years old when she learned that her husband had been lying to her for 2 years. Not one lie. Not a mistake. 2 years of Sunday mornings, and shared meals, and quiet nights, all of it built on a woman named Della Marsh, whose name Cora Halliwell would not hear, until a boarding house keeper handed her a folded newspaper from Chattanooga. By the end of that week, Cora had $3.13 to her name. A cast iron skillet, a Bible her mother had left her, and a debt her husband had signed in her name that she had no way to pay. She could have stayed in Bean Station, Tennessee, and become the woman that everyone whispered about at the general store. She could have gone back to her aunt in Kentucky and lived out her days as a cautionary tale. Instead, on the morning of September 14th, 1892, she walked 11 miles into the hills above Richland Creek to a stone smokehouse that had been abandoned for 12 years. The roof had fallen in. The east wall had shifted. The door was gone. And she looked at it, this ruined thing that no one wanted, and she thought, this looks about right. What happened in that smokehouse over the next 62 years is the story I want to tell you tonight. Settle in. Pour yourself something warm. The fire is lit. Peggy Loomis stood in the doorway of the boarding house room, with a folded newspaper in her hand, and said only 2 words. "Cora, honey." That was all. But Cora Halliwell, ironing her husband's second-best shirt on a Tuesday morning in August 1892, already knew. Because there is a way a woman says honey when she is about to break another woman's heart. And Peggy Loomis had said it exactly that way. Cora set the iron down on the trivet. Careful. Deliberate. The way you set down a thing that could burn you. "What is it, Mrs. Loomis?" "Sit down, child. I would rather stand." Peggy sighed. Then she stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. And she unfolded the paper. And she held it out. The Chattanooga Daily Times. Dated 3 days ago. Page 4. A small notice. Half a column. Mr. Ezra Halliwell of Bean Station, Tennessee, was seen this week at the Iron Horse Hotel in the company of Miss Della Marsh, daughter of Mr. Cyrus Marsh of the Marsh Textile Mill. The couple has taken lodging in the second-floor suite, and appears to intend a long stay. Cora read it once. Then she read it again. Then she folded the newspaper in half, and then in quarters, and then in eighths. And she handed it back to Peggy Loomis, with hands that did not shake. Because if her hands started shaking, she was afraid they might never stop. "Thank you, Mrs. Loomis." "Cora, I said thank you." Peggy nodded. Slow. She understood dignity. She had needed it herself once. She turned to leave. Then she paused at the door. "There is something else you should know." Cora waited. "They have been seen together for a long time. Not just this week." 2 years, honey. Maybe longer. And that was the sentence that finally landed. 2 years. 2 years of Sunday mornings, when Ezra said he was going down to the mill to check on a lumber order. 2 years of Wednesday nights, when he said he was playing cards with the Henshaw brothers. 2 years of hands that did not touch her hand at supper, and eyes that would not meet her eyes across the pillow, and a silence that had grown so thick in their small rented room that Cora had convinced herself it was normal, because that is what a woman does when she does not want to see. She looks at the silence, and she names it marriage. And she puts on her apron and irons the second-best shirt. Peggy Loomis closed the door softly behind her, and Cora Halliwell stood in the center of the room. And she looked at the iron cooling on the trivet, and she looked at Ezra's shirt hanging on the wooden rack, and she thought, I have been ironing the shirt of a man who has not loved me in 2 years." Then she thought, or ever. Then she sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. Then she folded her hands in her lap. Then she did not cry. She just sat there. For a long time. The next morning, Barnabas Krim came to the boarding house. 64 years old. Owner of Krim's General Store on Front Street. A man built like a barrel, and shaped by 40 years of standing behind a counter. His face seemed carved out of an old pine stump. And he carried, in his coat pocket, a piece of folded paper that would change the last thing Cora Halliwell still had left. Her name. Peggy Loomis brought him up to the second floor and knocked on Cora's door. "Mr. Krim to see you, Cora." Cora opened the door. She had not slept. She had not changed her dress. But she had washed her face and pinned her hair. Because when disaster comes, some women wear armor. And Cora's armor was neatness. Barnabas removed his hat. He held it against his chest with both hands. Which is what men do when they are about to deliver something they do not want to deliver. "Mrs. Halliwell." "Mr. Krim." "May I come in?" "You may say what you have to say from the hallway." He nodded. He respected that. "Your husband owes my store $47.80. Cora blinked. $47.80. For what? Barnabas cleared his throat. He looked at his hat. He looked at the floorboards. He looked anywhere but at her face. Whiskey. Tobacco. A silver hair comb. A pair of ladies' gloves. A gold pin shaped like a lark. A bottle of French perfume from the traveling drummer in April. Chocolate from. Stop. He stopped. Cora leaned against the doorframe. Because her knees had decided, without asking her, that they were done for the morning. "And when did my husband sign for these things, Mr. Krim?" "Over the last 2 years, ma'am." 2 years. "Yes, ma'am. And you did not think to tell me." Barnabas Krim looked up at last. And for the first time in the conversation, his old carved pine face showed something that might have been shame. "Mrs. Halliwell, I am a merchant. I extend credit." "I do not." "You do not what, Mr. Krim?" "I do not interfere in a marriage." Cora laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound a small animal makes when it steps into a trap, and the trap closes, and it looks down, and realizes it will not be walking out. "You did not interfere," she said. "No. You just wrote it all down. Every bottle. Every glove. Every pin shaped like a lark. And you kept the account current. Because that is what a merchant does. He keeps the account current. Mrs. Halliwell. How many people in this town knew Mr. Krim?" He did not answer. "How many people?" Still no answer. "Everyone. Is that right?" "Everyone in Bean Station knew my husband was buying gifts for another woman on credit. And not one of you, not one, thought to tell his wife." Barnabas Krim stared at his hat. And Cora understood, in that moment, something that would take other women a lifetime to learn. The town had not betrayed her by being cruel. The town had betrayed her by being polite, by whispering behind hands, by nodding at her in church, by taking her money for eggs at the market and asking after her health, while every last one of them knew. Polite. Every one of them. Polite as a Sunday hat. And their politeness had cost her 2 years of her life. "How much do you need, Mr. Krim?" "I would take payments, ma'am." "How much?" $47.80. "Yes. I heard you the first time. Give me until spring." He nodded. He put his hat back on. He hesitated at the top of the stairs. "For what it is worth, Mrs. Halliwell, I am sorry." Cora looked at him, and she thought, "You are sorry now that I know. You were not sorry when I did not." But she did not say it. She just closed the door. And this time, when her hands started to shake, she let them. She went to church that Sunday, not because she believed God had anything to say to her that morning, but because if she did not go, the whispers would become louder. And Cora Halliwell had decided that if she was going to leave Bean Station, she was going to leave it with her back straight. She wore the gray dress, the one Ezra had never noticed. She sat in the third pew, from the back on the left side, near the aisle. And halfway through the second hymn, a small woman slid into the pew beside her. Winifred Blackwood, 71 years old, a widow of 39 years standing, face the color and softness of good bread dough, hair the color of iron, hands the color of walnut, and eyes, pale gray eyes, that looked at a person the way a doctor looks at a patient. Kindly, but not fooled. Winifred did not look at Cora during the hymn. She just sang along in a thin, true voice. When the hymn ended, and the congregation sat down for the sermon, Winifred leaned toward her, and she whispered, "Child, I know a place." Cora did not turn her head. "Ma'am? A place." "Empty. Nobody wants it. Nobody watches it. Nobody will come after you if you go." "What kind of place?" "A smokehouse. On the ridge above Richland Creek. Belonged to a family called Ashbury. All dead now, or moved off. Been standing empty 12 years. The preacher was talking about Lot's wife. Cora kept her eyes forward. "Why are you telling me this, Mrs. Blackwood?" Winifred was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice so soft it was almost breath, "Because when my Amos died, I was 32 years old, with 3 babies, and no one told me where to go. I promised the Lord that if I ever saw another woman in that boat, I would tell her." Consider yourself told. The preacher was talking about pillars of salt. Cora did not turn her head, but she reached her hand across the pew, and Winifred Blackwood took it. And they sat like that, 2 women holding hands under the wooden pew, while the preacher told the congregation not to look back. She left Bean Station on the 14th of September, 1892. At sunrise, she had $3.13 in a small cloth purse pinned inside her dress, a cast iron skillet wrapped in a flour sack, a Bible her mother had left her when she died, a carpet bag containing 2 dresses, 3 aprons, 1 shawl, a comb, a bar of lye soap, and a folded piece of paper on which Winifred Blackwood had drawn a map. She did not say goodbye to anyone. There was no one to say goodbye to. She walked out of the boarding house at first light. Peggy Loomis stood on the porch and watched her go, and did not speak, and did not wave, but she pressed her lips together in a way that meant Godspeed. Cora walked west along the Richland Creek Road. 11 miles. The road climbed. The trees thickened. The September sun came down warm through the poplar leaves, and the shadow of every leaf moved across her face as she walked. By 10 in the morning, her feet were hot in her shoes. By noon, her back ached from the carpet bag. By 3 in the afternoon, she had stopped noticing either, because there is a kind of walking a woman does when she is nowhere behind her, and there is nothing to feel except the ground under her feet, and the next step, and the next step, and the next step. At 4 o'clock the sky went dark suddenly. A September rain came down. Fast. Cold. The kind of rain that does not warn you. Cora took shelter under a big white oak at a bend in the road. She sat down against the trunk, with her carpet bag between her knees, and she pulled her shawl over her head. She sat there for 2 hours. Alone. And somewhere Deep in the woods, she heard a wolf. Or she thought she did. She was too tired to be afraid. When the rain stopped, she stood up. And she wiped her face. And she picked up the carpet bag. And she kept walking. She reached the top of the ridge just as the sun was setting. And she saw it. The Ashbury place. Or what was left of it. The farmhouse had folded in on itself like an old woman going to sleep. The porch had pulled away from the front wall. The roof ridge had cracked in the middle. Ivy had climbed up the north side. A dogwood tree had grown right through what used to be the parlor window. The barn was gone. Nothing left of it but a low mound of gray boards and rusted nails held together by a trumpet vine. But the smokehouse stood 200 yards behind the ruined house, on a cleared rise above the creek, made of gray limestone the color of a mourning dove, 18 inches thick, fitted stone by stone, without a drop of mortar, 12 feet square, 9 feet tall. The roof had partly fallen. The east wall had shifted, where a young tulip poplar had come up under the foundation. The upper 3 courses of stone had tilted outward and left a gap that Cora could see the sky through. But the walls were there. The chimney was there. The floor was there. Cora set down her carpet bag. She walked around the building. Slowly. Once. Then twice. She ran her hand along the south wall. The stones were still warm from the day's sun. Late September warm. Like something living. Like an animal that had been sleeping in the sun and did not yet know she had arrived. She lit a match at the mouth of the firebox. The little flame bent inward. Sharp. Fast. Which meant the flue was clear all the way to the top of the chimney. Which meant the house could breathe. She stood in the doorway. The last light of the day was orange behind her. The inside of the smokehouse was black. And in the black, for huge oak beams ran across the ceiling, blackened with 40 years of hickory smoke, hard as iron. And from each beam, still hanging for rusted iron hooks, Cora set her carpet bag on the flagstone floor. She said, out loud to nobody, "This will do." She was 22 years old. And that was the first sentence she had spoken all day. The first night, she did not build a fire. She did not know how the chimney behaved. She did not want to fill the room with smoke. She spread her shawl on the flagstones near the south wall, and she lay down with the cast iron skillet within reach of her right hand. Because she was alone, in a stone building, in the woods, and she was not a fool. The stones held the day's heat for hours. She could feel it through the shawl, as if the smokehouse itself were trying to keep her warm, as if it remembered how. She fell asleep watching the square stars through the hole in the roof. She did not dream of Ezra. She dreamed of nothing at all, which was, after 2 years of dreaming about a man who did not love her, the sweetest sleep of her life. Just before dawn, she heard footsteps. Not fast. Not sneaking. Heavy. Slow. Measured. The footsteps of a man who was not trying to hide the fact that he was coming. Cora sat up. She wrapped her fingers around the handle of the skillet. Her heart moved once hard in her chest. Then she stood up, because Winifred Blackwood had told her something on the porch of the church last Sunday, and she had been thinking about it every mile of the walk yesterday. Winifred had said, "A woman alone must not answer the door sitting down." Cora stepped to the doorway. She held the skillet at her side. She waited. The footsteps stopped 10 feet from the smokehouse, and a voice came out of the gray dawn. "I am not going to hurt you, ma'am." She did not answer. "I saw the smoke from your match last evening, from my cabin up on the ridge. I came to see who was here. Still she did not answer. The voice moved closer. Slow. Careful. My name is Silas Renwick. I trap in these woods. My cabin is 2 miles east. I have been here 14 years. And I am the only person likely to come up this ridge in a month. So you might as well see me now and decide what you want to do about it. He stepped into her line of sight. He was tall. Very tall. 6'2", maybe 6'3". 33 years old, but weathered like 40. Dark beard cut short. Dark hair pulled back with a leather strip. A long rifle in the crook of his left arm, the barrel pointed at the ground. A canvas coat that had seen 10 winters. Boots that had walked farther than most horses. And his face. His face was the face of a man who did not smile, because he had forgotten how, but who would not lie to you if you asked him a direct question. I have a skillet, Cora said. Silas Renwick looked at the skillet. Then he looked at her. And for the first time, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Just an acknowledgement. Yes, ma'am. I see it. I know how to use it. I do not doubt it. Silence. Then he said, Who are you? Cora Halliwell. From where? From Bean Station. Yesterday. Alone? Yes. Husband? Gone. He nodded. Once. He did not ask what gone meant. In these hills, in 1892, gone had many meanings. And none of them required an explanation from a woman standing barefoot in a doorway with a skillet. He looked past her into the smokehouse, at the fallen roof, at the cracked east wall, at the flagstones, at the beams. He looked up at the sky. He looked at her again. Ma'am. Yes. With respect, you are going to freeze to death in this building within 3 nights. Cora tightened her grip on the skillet. Is that a threat, Mr. Renwick? That is a weather report. He turned and walked back the way he had come. He did not say goodbye. He did not tell her he would come back. He just walked off into the woods. And Cora Halliwell stood in the doorway of the Ashbury Smokehouse, with her skillet in her hand and thought, Well, that is the strangest weather report I have ever received. He came back at noon. He had a bundle of split cedar shakes over one shoulder, a coil of rope over the other, a hammer, and a pouch of iron nails at his belt, and an expression that said he had made his decision and did not intend to discuss it. He set the bundle down at the door of the smokehouse. Mr. Renwick, the lady who built this place fed me when I first came into this county 14 years ago. Mrs. Ashbury. I was 19 years old. I had not eaten in 4 days. She gave me bread. She gave me pork. She gave me a place to sleep behind her barn. She died 10 years ago, and I never paid her back. He looked at Cora. I owe her. I do not owe you. But she is dead, and you are here. So I am going to fix her smokehouse. You may take that any way you please. Cora looked at him. She looked at the bundle of shakes. She looked at the sky, which was still and gray and would rain again by evening. Mr. Renwick. Ma'am. Would you like some water? Yes, ma'am. I would. And that is how it began. Winifred Blackwood came on the 3rd day. She had walked 8 miles from her little cabin on the Richland Road. 8 miles. At 71. Carrying a basket over one arm and a wool blanket over the other. She arrived in the middle of the morning with her cheeks pink from the walk and her thin gray braid coming loose from its pins. She set the basket in the doorway. She looked at the smokehouse. She looked at the roof, which Silas Renwick was, at that moment, halfway through repairing. She looked at Silas. She looked at Cora. She said, "Well, that is faster than I expected." Silas touched the brim of his hat and kept working. Winifred took Cora by the arm and walked her a little way off into the yard, where the trumpet vine used to be, and she said quietly, "Do you know that man? He came the first morning. He said he owed Mrs. Ashbury. He is telling the truth. Silas Renwick will not lie to you." "But you make sure, child, that he sleeps in his own cabin at night, and not in this yard. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am. A woman's name in these hills is like a pane of glass. Once it is cracked, no one can uncrack it. And Silas knows that, which is why he will not stay. But you keep watch all the same." "I will." Winifred nodded. She turned back toward the smokehouse. She looked at it a long time. Her old pale eyes went soft in a way that they had not been soft before. She said, more to herself than to Cora, "I was in this smokehouse 40 years ago." Cora looked at her. "You were?" "I cooked for the Ashburys 2 seasons. When I was 31. Before my Amos died. Before the babies came. I stood right there." She pointed to the spot where the firebox opened onto the room, "and I learned how to smoke a shoulder of pork from Mrs. Ashbury herself. She taught me. Salt, sugar, pepper, 4 days of hickory. No oak, no cedar." Cora watched her. "Mrs. Blackwood. Winnie. Just Winnie. If we are going to keep meeting up here, we are done with Mrs. Winnie. Are you going to teach me to smoke a pork shoulder?" Winifred Blackwood turned to look at her. And for the first time since Cora had met her, she smiled. Not big, not showy, just a small private smile, like a woman who has been waiting a long time to open a door and has just been handed the key. "Child," she said, "I have been carrying that recipe in my head for 40 years, and there has not been one soul in Grainger County who wanted to learn it. Yes, I am going to teach you. Come October, when the first hog is butchered on Richland Creek, you and I are going to smoke the finest shoulder that this smokehouse has smoked since 1852. Do you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Now let us go boil water. That man on the roof is going to want coffee, and I expect neither of you has thought about it." She marched toward the doorway, and Cora Halliwell, 22 years old, standing in the yard of a smokehouse she had claimed from ruin 3 days ago, watched an old woman disappear into a stone building carrying a basket of bread and pickled beans. And she thought, for the first time since she had left Bean Station, "I am not alone." They fixed the east wall in 4 days. Silas found the old Ashbury quarry a quarter-mile up the creek, where the water had cut a face of limestone that broke clean along its bedding plains. He borrowed a wheelbarrow from a farmer named Pearl Denniston, who lived a mile down the road, and he and Cora hauled stone. He showed her how the old builders had fitted the courses. Turn a stone. Try it. Turn it again. Try it again. Rotate it a quarter turn. Try. Keep turning until you felt the stone click into place against the one below it, so tight that a knife blade would not pass between them. The first stone she set wrong 3 times. And she almost cried on the 4th. But she did not cry. She turned it once more, and it clicked. She sat back on her heels in the yard, and she stared at that one small gray stone. And she said out loud, "Well?" Silas Renwick, on the other side of the wall, did not laugh. But she could hear the smile in his voice when he said, "Yes, ma'am." Well, by the end of the 4th day, the east wall was whole. 3 courses rebuilt. Every stone locked into every other stone. No mortar. Nothing but weight and patience and the hands of a 22-year-old woman who, on the morning of September 14th, had not known she had those hands. The roof took another week. The door came from the ruined farmhouse. A solid oak panel with iron strap hinges. Cora pried it off the sagging front entrance herself, and she carried it up the hill on her own back, one end dragging in the dirt, because Silas was 2 days away hunting, and she had decided she did not need to wait. She hung it. She shimmed it with cedar wedges. She drove the 3-inch nails. It latched. She stood on the inside of the smokehouse, with the door closed, and she listened. Nothing. No wind. No wolf. No preacher. No Ezra. Just the sound of her own breath in a stone room, and the far-off sound of the creek. And very faintly, the sound of her own heart doing the same thing it had been doing for 22 years. She was sealed in. For the first time in her life, Cora Halliwell was sealed inside a place that belonged to her. And then, at the end of September, Ezra came back. She was carrying water up from the creek. 2 wooden buckets, one in each hand, balanced against the yoke of her shoulders, so her back stayed straight. She came over the rise, and she saw him, standing in her yard, standing at the door of her smokehouse. Ezra Halliwell, 24 years old, once handsome, now thinner, his jacket sleeve torn at the elbow, his hat missing, his boots caked with clay, his pretty mouth turned down at the corners in the particular sag of a man who has been told no by a woman for the first time in his life. Cora set the buckets down. Slow. She did not go closer. He saw her. He raised his hand. "Cora!" She did not answer. "Cora, honey! I have been looking for you for a week." She still did not answer. He took a step toward her. Della and I, it did not." "Stop." He stopped. "Do not walk toward me, Ezra. Stand right where you are." "Cora, please." I said stop talking. He stopped. And Cora Halliwell, who had not spoken more than 3 sentences to another person in a week, discovered that her voice had grown, while she was not looking. It had grown down deep into her chest, where the smokehouse walls had taught her breath how to move. And when she spoke, now, the sound came from a place she had not known she owned. "You owe Mr. Krim $47.80. I am going to pay that debt. Not for you. For me. Because I do not intend for anyone in Bean Station to say I left because of money. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "You will not come here again. Cora, you will not come here again, Ezra Halliwell. Not tomorrow. Not next spring. Not when you have run out of every other door. You are done with this door." His face broke, because there is a moment when a man who has always been forgiven realizes he is not going to be forgiven this time. And his face breaks, not in grief, in surprise, because he did not know it was possible. He said, "Where am I supposed to go?" Cora looked at him, and she said, quietly, and with no cruelty in her voice at all, "That is not my problem anymore." He stood there another moment. Then he turned, and he walked down the ridge road toward Bean Station. He did not look back. Cora watched him until he was small, and then smaller, and then gone. Then she picked up the water buckets, and she carried them into the smokehouse, and she poured them into the iron pot on the hearth. And she sat down on the flagstone floor, and she pressed her forehead against the cool gray stone of the south wall, the stone that Silas had set, the stone that she had set, the stone that had been holding this small square of the world together for 44 years before she was born. And she closed her eyes. And she said, out loud to the stone, "Thank you." That night Silas came back from his hunt. He did not come into the yard. He never came into the yard after dark. He stopped at the edge of the trees, and he called, once, so she would know it was him. She stepped out onto the flagstone step in front of the door. The moon was up. He was a shadow at the edge of the pines. "Everything all right, Mrs. Halliwell?" "Cora." "Ma'am?" "Just Cora." A pause. "Everything all right, Cora?" She thought about it. She thought about the shirt she had ironed on a Tuesday morning. She thought about Peggy Loomis at the door. She thought about Barnabas Crimm's hat pressed to his chest. She thought about Winifred Blackwood in the third pew of the church. She thought about 11 miles of road, and a white oak in the rain. She thought about the first match at the mouth of the firebox, and the way the flame had bent inward, hungry, alive, as if the smokehouse had been waiting for someone to strike a light in it again. She thought about the sound of a stone clicking into place under her hand. She thought about Ezra's back, growing smaller down the ridge road. She looked out at the shadow of Silas Renwick at the edge of her trees, keeping his distance the way a decent man keeps his distance from a woman who lives alone. She said, "Yes, everything is all right." And she meant it. The shadow lifted its hat. "Good night, Cora." "Good night, Silas." And he was gone. And she went back inside her stone house. And she closed the oak door. And she latched it. And she banked the fire in the firebox to a low red glow. And she laid down on her shawl on the flagstones. And she watched the last of the September stars through the last unpatched gap in the roof. And she thought, Winnie was right. This is not the place where I am hiding. This is the place where I begin. She fell asleep. And for the second night in her life, she did not dream of Ezra. She dreamed of hickory smoke. Winifred Blackwood came up the ridge on the 22nd of October, with a pork shoulder on her shoulder. 8 pounds. Fresh. Skin still on. Wrapped in muslin. She was 71 years old. She had walked 8 miles. And she was carrying 8 pounds of raw pork on her shoulder like a farmhand walking home from a hog killing. Cora saw her coming and set down the axe. "Winnie, give me that. I have carried heavier things than a pig child." "When?" Winifred thought. "Once." "When?" 1861. "What was it?" "My husband." Cora stopped. Winifred kept walking. She reached the flagstone step. She lowered the shoulder onto the work Cora had built from a slab of limestone set on 2 courses of stacked stone. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked around the smokehouse yard. At the split cedar stacked against the north wall. At the lintel that Silas had helped Cora build the week before. At the glass window Cora had set into the south wall with her own 2 hands. Winifred said, "You have been busy." "I have." "Good." She turned to the shoulder. She unwrapped the muslin. She looked down at the pale pink meat with the streak of white fat and the good clean skin, and she said, in the voice of a woman who had been waiting 40 years for this exact moment, "Now, listen to me. Because I am only going to say this once. And when I am gone, this is how you will remember me. Not by my face. By this. Are you listening?" "Yes, Winnie." "For tablespoons of salt. Per pound." Cora nodded. "Say it back." "For tablespoons. Per pound. Rubbed in. Every crevice. Every fold. Under the skin where you can lift it. Between the muscle and the bone. Every place a knife has cut. Every place God did not cut. Rubbed in. Do you hear me?" "Yes." Then brown sugar. A handful. Pressed in with the flat of your hand. Not too heavy. You are seasoning meat. You are not baking a cake. "Yes." Then cracked pepper. black, fresh, never dust. Dust is what you sweep off a shelf. Dust does not go on meat. No, ma'am. Then hickory. Not oak. Oak burns hot. Oak is for a stove. For meat you use hickory. Because hickory burns slow, and hickory burns cool, and hickory smells like a Tennessee woods in October, and that is the taste you want in a shoulder. Are you listening, child? I am listening. Small fire. Barely a fire. A handful of coals. A mound of damp chips. More smoke than flame. You are not cooking this meat. You are teaching it patience. Do you understand? Cora looked at her. You are teaching it patience. Yes. Winnie. What? Are we still talking about the pork? Winifred Blackwood looked at her, and she smiled that small private smile again. 4 days, she said. Do not open the door. Do not let the fire go out. Do not touch it. On the 5th day, you lift the canvas. She wiped her hands on her apron one more time. She said, and on the 5th day, child, you find out whether the smokehouse remembers you. For 4 days, Cora Halliwell did not sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. She rose every 3 hours in the night to check the coals, to lay a fresh handful of damp hickory chips on the mound, to watch the thin blue smoke curl up through the shared flue and drift into the lean-to, where the shoulder hung on its iron hook. The nights were cold now, late October cold. Frost on the flagstone in the morning, her breath white in the doorway. But the smokehouse held its heat. 18 inches of fitted limestone. A firebox that had not been used in 12 years, and had remembered its work on the 3rd strike of a match. A shared flue that carried the coals warm first through the main room, where she slept, then out through the lean-to, where the meat waited, then up into the October night sky above Richland Creek. 1 fire. 2 jobs. Her body warm. The meat curing. On the 3rd night, at 2 in the morning, she stood in the doorway of the lean-to, with a tallow candle in one hand, and the flame reflected small and gold in her eyes. And she looked at the dark shape of the pork shoulder hanging from its hook. And she thought, Winnie, if you are wrong about this, I am going to walk 8 miles to your house, and I am going to sit on your porch, and I am going to weep. Then she thought, Winnie is not wrong. Then she thought, how do I know that? Then she thought, because Winifred Blackwood has never been wrong about anything in her life. And if she was going to start being wrong, she would not start with pork. She went back to bed. She slept. On the 5th morning, she lifted the canvas. The smell came out first. Not smoke. Not exactly. Deeper than smoke. Older than smoke. It was the smell of a forest in autumn, of dry leaves and hickory bark and the sun coming through pine needles. It was the smell of every October Cora Halliwell had ever known, compressed and folded and pressed into 8 pounds of pork. She stared. The shoulder had turned the color of dark mahogany, firm to the touch. When she pressed her thumb against the surface, the meat sprang back like good bread dough. She lifted her thumb and smelled it. And the smoke had gotten into her skin. She stood there for a long time. She did not cry. Cora Halliwell had cried enough for 1 year. But she pressed her forehead against the doorframe of the lean-to, and she said quietly, "Thank you, Mrs. Ashbury." And then quieter, "Thank you, Winnie." And then quieter still, "Thank you." She did not say to whom. She sold the shoulder at the Bean Station Market on the last Saturday of October. She rode down, with Pearl Denniston in his wagon, the one who had loaned Silas the wheelbarrow. He was going to town anyway to sell squash. He did not charge her. He did not talk to her either, most of the way, because Pearl Denniston was 59 years old and had lost a wife and 2 daughters to typhoid in the 80s. And he had learned to travel 8 miles beside another person, without needing to fill it up with words. Cora set up her cloth on a small folding table at the edge of the market square. She placed the shoulder on it. She waited. The first person who stopped was a man in a leather apron. Otis Wyeth, 67 years old. The butcher of Bean Station for the last 31 of those years. A short square man with a face like a boot, eyebrows the color and shape of 2 old scrub brushes. He looked at the shoulder. He picked it up. He turned it over. He pressed his thumb into the surface. He smelled his thumb. He put the shoulder back down. He said, without looking at Cora, "Where?" "Where what, sir?" "Where was this done?" "The Ashbury Smokehouse." He looked at her. "I thought that building fell in 10 years ago." "I put it back up, Mr. Wyeth." Otis Wyeth looked at her a long time. Then he reached into his coat pocket. He counted out 65 cents. In coin. He laid it on the table. He picked up the shoulder. He tucked it under his arm. He walked 3 steps away. He stopped. He turned around. "Mississippi. Mrs. Halliwell. Mrs. Halliwell. You bring me 2 more of these next Saturday." "Yes, sir." "And do not sell to anyone else first." "Yes, sir." He walked away. Cora sat down on the little 3-legged stool behind the folding table. She looked at the 65 cents in coin on the cloth. And she thought, well. Barnabas Krim was watching from across the market square. Of course he was watching. Barnabas Krim watched everything. That was the job of a merchant. To watch. To keep the account current. He watched the whole exchange with Otis Wyeth. He watched Cora Halliwell sit down on the 3-legged stool with her 65 cents. He watched her sit there for a long moment without moving. And then he watched her stand up and fold the cloth and pick up her little table and walk across the market square toward his store. She came in through the front door. The bell rang. She stood in the middle of the store. She said, "Mr. Krim." He came out from behind the counter. "Mrs. Halliwell, I owe you $47.80. Ma'am, I have 65 cents today. I would like to pay it against the debt. I will bring more next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and every Saturday until it is paid." Barnabas Krim stood there. He was 64 years old. He had been running a general store for 40 years. He had heard a lot of speeches from a lot of people who owed him money. Some of them cried. Some of them shouted. Some of them offered him chickens. Nobody had ever walked into his store with 65 cents in coin and set it down on his counter with their chin lifted and their back straight and said, "I would like to pay it against the debt." He looked at the coin. He looked at her face. He said, "Mrs. Halliwell, I need to buy salt for my smoking. 2 pounds. "Yes, ma'am." He walked around behind the counter. He weighed out 2 pounds of salt. Course. What? Good. He wrapped it in brown paper. He set the paper on the counter. He said, 2 cents. Cora looked at him. "Mr. Krim." "Yes, ma'am. Salt is 3 cents a pound in this store. It has been 3 cents a pound for the last 2 years. That is correct. You just said 2. For 2 pounds. Yes. That is not. That is my price for you, Mrs. Halliwell. If it is not acceptable, you may take your business elsewhere." She looked at him. She looked at the salt. She looked at the 65 cents she had set down. She picked up 2 cents. She left the 63. She said, "Against the debt." "Yes, ma'am." She picked up the salt. She walked to the door. At the door she stopped, because she wanted to say something, because she wanted to ask him why, because she wanted to know if this was pity or shame or something else, some other thing she did not have a word for yet. But then she thought, a woman does not ask for the reason behind a kindness. She takes the kindness and she goes. She said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Krim. Good afternoon, Mrs. Halliwell." The bell rang as the door closed behind her. Barnabas Krim stood behind the counter and looked at the 63 cents on the wood. 63 cents. Against a debt of $47.17 remaining. He picked up the 63 cents. He put it in the tin box under the counter, where he kept the day's take. He said, out loud to nobody, "That is a start." By December, she had 3 regular customers. Otis Wyeth for the shoulders and the hams. Pearl Denniston, who brought her a small pig every 3 weeks, and paid her 15 cents a pound to smoke it. And a widow woman named Delphine Marker, who had a boarding house in Bean Station, and who wanted smoked bacon slabs for her Sunday breakfasts, because her boarders would pay 2 cents extra a plate for hickory bacon, $2 to $3 a week, which was not a great deal of money, except that Cora Halliwell did not need a great deal of money. She had a stone house. She had a firebox. She had a well behind the ruined farmhouse that still gave clean water. Silas Renwick brought her venison every 10 days without asking. Winifred Blackwood brought her cornmeal and beans and told her not to argue. $2 to $3 a week was enough to buy salt and sugar and pepper and thread and glass for the second window she cut into the west wall. And, in the 3rd week of November, a small cast iron kettle with a proper handle to replace the one she had been using to boil water. And every Saturday she carried something down to Bean Station, and she put it against the debt. By the end of November the debt was down to $39. By the end of December it was down to $31. She did not tell Silas about the debt. She did not tell Winifred. It was her debt. It had her name on it, because it had her husband's name on it, which meant it had her name on it in every way that mattered in 1892. She was going to pay it herself. And she did. The second window let in the afternoon light. That was the change she had not expected. She had cut it into the west wall on a Thursday afternoon in November. Silas had helped her lift the glass into the opening and shim it with cedar. He had stayed on the outside of the wall the whole time. He had not once come into the smokehouse to look at the light. But when they were done, and she stepped inside, and she closed the door, and she stood in the middle of the 12-foot room, with the afternoon sun coming through the west window at a slant that cut across the flagstones and lit the south wall gold, she stopped breathing for a moment. Because the limestone turned the color of warm bread. Every stone, every joint, every course, gold in the light, warm and soft and living, the way bread looks when you take it out of the oven, and the crust is still steaming, and the color is between wheat and honey, and you know, with your hands and your nose and your heart, that this is a good loaf, that this is bread that will feed people. She stood there for a long time, and she thought, this is my house, not Ezra's house, not the boarding house, not the little rented room where she had ironed a shirt for a man who had not loved her. Her house, 12 feet square, 9 feet tall, 288 square feet of fitted limestone. Her house. She sat down on the flagstone floor in the middle of the golden light, and she pressed her palms flat against the warm stone. And she said, out loud, "Well?" Then she said, "I did this." And then, because Winifred Blackwood had taught her the value of finishing a thought, "I did this." and nobody can take it from me. Silas Renwick did not come into the smokehouse. Not once. Not for a cup of coffee. Not to warm his hands. Not to see the new window. Not to admire the mahogany color of the third shoulder she smoked, or the way the shared flue drew in a north wind, or the way she had built proper shelves into the west wall with limestone slabs. He came into the yard every 3 or 4 days. He brought venison. He brought cedar. He brought a bag of hickory chips he had been drying in his own woodshed. He brought a pair of leather-work gloves in November, because he had noticed her hands were splitting from the cold. But he did not come inside. He sat on the flagstone step, or he stood at the corner of the lintel, with one shoulder against the stone, or he squatted by the firebox opening from the outside and looked at how the smoke was drawing that day. He never crossed the threshold of the oak door, and after the 5th or 6th visit, when the pattern had made itself clear, Cora came out one evening with 2 tin cups of coffee, and she handed him one, and she sat down on the flagstone step beside him, and she said, "Silas." "Ma'am." "Cora. Cora. You will not come inside." He looked into his coffee. "No, ma'am. I will not." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you live alone up here, and I am a grown man, and in 3 months' time, some fool down in Bean Station is going to start a story about a widow woman on the ridge, and the trapper who spends his afternoons with her. And that story does not die. Not in these hills. Not ever." She looked at him. "Silas." "Yes. You do not care what they say about you." "No. But you care what they say about me." "Yes." She held her coffee in both hands. She looked out over the yard. The trumpet vine, gone black with frost. The last of the yellow poplar leaves on the trees down the slope. The pale gray strip of the creek at the bottom of the valley. She said quietly, "My husband did not care what they said about me." Silas Renwick was quiet a long time. Then he said, "No, ma'am." "I do not expect he did." She turned to look at him. He was looking out at the creek. His profile was quiet, hawk-nosed, weathered, the dark beard trimmed close, his hat pushed back a little on his forehead, his hands wrapped around his tin cup for the warmth. He did not look at her. But he said, "I will not come inside your house, Cora Halliwell, because your name is the last thing in this world that is only yours, and I will not put my boots on it." And Cora Halliwell, 22 years old, sitting on the flagstone step of a smokehouse she had rebuilt, with her own hands, felt something move in her chest. Not romance. Not longing. Something older. Something quieter. Something that had a name she had never known she needed. It was the feeling of a woman being protected without being owned. She did not have a word for it. She was not sure a word existed. She just said, "Thank you, Silas." And he said, "Do not thank me for a decency." "Ma'am." Early December. First snow. He came up to the yard through the trees. He was limping. Cora was splitting kindling by the lintel when she looked up and saw him coming out of the pines, with his rifle in one hand and his other hand pressed against his thigh. His trouser leg was dark, with blood from the knee down. She dropped the axe. She ran to him. "Silas! Silas! What happened?" "What?" "Bear trap." "Yours?" "Not mine. Somebody's. I was tracking a deer. Stepped in it." "How bad?" "Not bad, but bad enough. I can make it home." "You are not making it home." "You are 2 miles from home. In the snow. Bleeding. You come inside." He stopped in the middle of the yard. He looked at the oak door. He said, "Cora, do not Cora me. You come inside." The talk. There is no talk in a snowstorm, Silas Renwick. There is no talk in a bear trap. There is nobody within 4 miles of this ridge tonight. And if there was, I would hand them the leg of that trap and tell them to try walking on it. Come inside. Now. He came inside. She had never seen him inside. He filled the doorway. He stooped a little under the beam. His shoulders touched both sides of the frame. He stood on her flagstone floor in his bloody boots, and he looked at the fire in the firebox, and at the shelves with the mason jars, and at the sleeping platform against the south wall, and at the little cast iron kettle steaming on the hob, and at the way the December afternoon light was coming through the west window and turning her limestone gold. He looked at all of it, and he said, in a voice she had not heard from him before, "Oh!" Just that. "Oh!" Then she got him onto the sleeping platform. She cut the trouser leg with her sewing scissors. The wound was a deep gash on the outside of the calf. Long, ugly, but clean. The trap had been rusted. She washed it with hot water and lye soap, and it made him bite through his own lip. She stitched it with the same needle and thread she used for her aprons, because she did not have anything else. She stitched it with the neatness of a woman who had worked in a textile mill from age 14. 21 stitches. Small and even. She wrapped it in torn strips of her second-best petticoat. He watched her work. He did not make a sound after the lye soap. When she was done, she pressed her hand to his forehead. "You are burning up. I am fine. You are not fine. I am, Silas." "Yes. You are going to stay here tonight. Cora, do not Cora me. Twice in one day. I will not have it. You are staying. You will sleep on the platform. I will sleep on the floor. In the morning, if the fever is down, you go home. But you are not walking 2 miles in the snow tonight, with a leg full of rusted iron." He looked at her. He said, "All right." That was all. All right. He talked in his sleep. Cora sat by the firebox, with her Bible open on her knees, and a wool blanket around her shoulders, and she pretended to read. She was not reading. She was listening, because Silas Renwick was talking in his sleep. And she had never heard him say more than 15 words at a stretch in the whole 3 months she had known him. And now the fever had opened him up like a door. He was saying a name. Rebecca. Over and over. Rebecca. Rebecca. It is cold, honey. Rebecca. The ground is hard. Rebecca. I told them I would dig it myself. Rebecca. Please. Cora closed the Bible. She put it on the flagstone next to her. She sat and listened. And in the low red light of the banked fire, she watched the face of a man she had been calling Mister for 3 months. And she saw, laid bare on his sleeping face, the shape of a grief that was 12 years old, and had never been unwrapped by any hand but the fever's. Rebecca. Rebecca. It should have been me. Rebecca. Cora Halliwell wept. Not for herself. For a stranger she had never met, who had died 12 years ago in a house Cora would never see. And for the man on her sleeping platform, who had loved her enough to dig her grave with his own hands. And had, from that day, refused every roof in Grainger County that had a woman under it. Until this one. Until tonight. Because there had been a bear trap. And a snowstorm. And a stubborn woman in a doorway. She wiped her face on the corner of her apron. She let him sleep. In the morning the fever had broken. He woke slowly. He blinked at the beams. He looked at his bandaged leg. He looked at Cora, who was frying salt pork and cornmeal cakes at the firebox. He said, "Cora, Silas, I talked. Yes. In my sleep. Yes." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "How much did I say?" "Enough." He closed his eyes. She turned the salt pork with a wooden spoon. She said, without looking at him, her name was Rebecca. Rebecca Coombs. Yes. When? 12 years ago. April. 3 days before the wedding. Typhoid. She was 20. Cora nodded. She turned a cake. You dug her grave. Yes. By yourself? Her father was sick. Her mother was sick. Her brother was sick. Somebody had to. I told them I would. And I did. The salt pork hissed. Cora slid the cakes onto a tin plate. She set the plate on the sleeping platform beside him. She sat down at the foot of the platform on the flagstones, with her back against the stone wall and her own plate in her lap. She did not look at him. She said, "Silas, may I say something?" "Yes." "You have not stayed inside a house with a woman in 12 years. Have you?" He was quiet. "No. Not once. No." "Why did you stay tonight?" He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, quietly, in the voice of a man saying a thing he has been holding in his mouth for weeks, "Because you did not need me to love you." Cora looked up. "You just needed me to be here." She held her plate in her lap. She said, "Yes." He nodded. "Slow," he said. "That is a thing I can do." She said, "I know." And they ate the cakes. And when he was strong enough, that afternoon, he walked home, through the snow, with a walking stick she cut for him from a length of hickory. And he did not come back to the smokehouse for 3 days. And when he came back, he sat on the flagstone step, the way he always did, because that was the rule. Except now the rule was not a wall between them. It was a promise. Reverend Elias Thornbury came up the ridge in the middle of December. He was 58. Round face. White beard. Eyes the color of a winter sky. He rode a little brown mare that he called Patience, and that he had been calling Patience for 21 years. He came up to the yard. He tied the mare to a poplar. He knocked on the oak door. Cora opened it. "Reverend, Mrs. Halliwell, will you come in?" "No, ma'am, I will not." That was so exactly the thing Silas would have said that Cora almost laughed. She brought 2 cups of coffee out to the flagstone step. They sat side by side. He held his hat on his knee. He did not say anything for a while. He looked at the smokehouse, at the lintel, at the mended east wall, at the 2 windows, at the small neat sign she had painted on a scrap of pine board and nailed above the door. "See, Halliwell, smoking done here." He looked at her. He said, "How are you, child?" "I am well, Reverend." "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Are you alone at night?" "I am alone at night." He nodded. He drank his coffee. Then he said, "I did not come to preach at you, Mrs. Halliwell. I came because I heard there was a woman up here by herself, and I wanted to know if she was all right. That is all. If you tell me you are all right, I will drink my coffee, and I will get on Patience, and I will ride back down the ridge." Cora looked at him. She said, "I am all right, Reverend." He nodded. He finished his coffee. He stood up. He set the empty cup on the flagstone. He put on his hat. At the poplar, before he untied the mare, he stopped. He turned around. He said, "Mrs. Halliwell." "Yes, Reverend." The church is at the end of the Richland Road. If you ever need it, or if you never need it, it is there. Thank you, sir. He mounted the mare. He touched his hat. He rode down the ridge. Cora sat on the step until the sound of the hoofbeats was gone. Then she went back inside her stone house, and she closed her oak door, and she thought, "The world is not what I thought it was. The world I thought I lived in was Bean Station, where everyone knew and nobody spoke. The world I actually live in is Winifred Blackwood, and Otis Wyeth, and Barnabas Crimm's 2-cent salt, and Silas Renwick on a flagstone step, and Reverend Elias Thornbury, who will not come inside, and who will not preach at me, and who told me the church is at the end of the road. This world has been here the whole time. I just could not see it, from a rented room in Bean Station." Coleman Weatherby came up twice. He was 64. A widower. A farmer with 200 acres down on the flats. And, for the last 19 years, the elected town elder of Bean Station. He came the first time in early December. He rode a big roan horse. He did not dismount. He looked at the smokehouse from the saddle. He said, "Mrs. Halliwell, Mr. Weatherby, I heard there was a smoking operation up here." "There is. On land you do not own." "That is correct. The Ashburys did not leave heirs in the county." "But they left heirs in Knoxville. Do you know that?" "I have heard that. They have not come to look at this property in 12 years. "No, sir. They may come tomorrow." "They may." He looked at her a long moment. He said, "Good day, Mrs. Halliwell. Good day, Mr. Weatherby." He turned the roan and rode down the ridge. Cora watched him go. Her heart was moving fast, because he had not said get out, but he had not said stay either. He had said they may come tomorrow, which was a thing a man says when he is deciding whether to be the one to tell them, or whether to let the winter tell them, or whether to say nothing at all. She did not sleep well that night. He came the second time on the last day of December. Late afternoon. The light already going gold at the west window. The sky the pale blue of a cold winter evening. He dismounted this time. He walked into the yard. He looked at the shoulder Cora was hanging in the lintel, and the ham, and the bacon slab, and the tidy stack of dried hickory in the corner, and the shelves of mason jars in the main room, through the open door, and the 2 clean windows, and the swept flagstone step, and the small painted sign. He walked all the way around the smokehouse. He came back to the door. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, "Mrs. Halliwell, sir, you are doing better work in this building than Mrs. Ashbury did, and I ate her hams for 30 years. Cora stared at him. He said, "I sent a letter to Knoxville, to the Ashbury's son, told him what was happening on his mother's ridge. He wrote me back. He said the property is his, and he does not want it. He said if there is a woman making use of it, he does not care to hear about it again. Sir, consider yourself unbothered, Mrs. Halliwell. From this side, Mr. Weatherby. Do not thank me. Weatherby men do not accept thanks for a decision they made on their own." He turned. He mounted the roan. At the edge of the yard, he paused. He looked back. He said, "Ma'am, if I may, whose daughter are you?" "She stood in the doorway of the smokehouse," she said. "I do not know, sir. My mother died when I was 11. She did not tell me much about herself." Coleman Weatherby looked at her. He said, "Well, whoever she was, she raised you good?" And he rode down the ridge. And Cora Halliwell went inside her stone house and sat down on the flagstone floor in the middle of the last golden light of 1892, and she pressed her hands flat against the warm stone. And she thought about her mother. whom she had barely known, whose face she could no longer picture, whose voice she had almost forgotten. She thought, "Mama, wherever you are, I did all right." Then the winter came. Not the ordinary winter. The winter of 1893 into 1894. The one they would still be talking about in Grainger County, when Cora Halliwell was an old woman. It began on the 4th of January. She woke up, and the water in her drinking bucket was frozen solid. Not a skin of ice on the top. The whole bucket. A block. She went to the door, and pushed it open, and a wall of snow fell into the room. The world outside was white. Not the usual white of a Tennessee January. Not a pretty snowfall. This snow was ferocious. Blue-white in the shadows. Blowing sideways. Stinging her cheeks the second she stepped out onto the flagstone step. The kind of snow that had come down not to decorate the world, but to erase it. She stood in the doorway, with the wind cutting through her wool shawl, and she looked out at what should have been the yard, and she could not see the lintel 10 feet away. She could not see the trees. She could not see the poplar Silas had tied his hat to. She could see, at the edge of her vision, the pale gray shape of the north wall of the lintel, and the smoke, the thin blue smoke of the fire she had banked at midnight, rising up out of the shared flue, and blowing sideways, torn to pieces by the wind, before it was 3 feet above the chimney. She stepped back inside. She closed the door. She latched it. She stood with her back against the oak. And she thought, "This is the winter Winnie told me about. The one where the smokehouse becomes a boat. And the boat is small. And the sea is very cold." She banked the fire higher. She wrapped herself in the wool blanket Winnie had given her the first week, and the shawl, from Ezra, she had never given back. She sat on the sleeping platform. And she waited for the wind to remember she was there. She did not know it yet. But down on the Richland Creek Road, in a smaller cabin, with a thinner roof, and a stove that burned green wood, and did not draw right, Winifred Blackwood, 71 years old, alone, was coughing. Coughing hard. And she could not stop. The snow came down for 6 days. 6 days of wind that sounded like a train that could not find its rails. 6 days of the flue drawing hard, because the pressure outside was so low that the smokehouse breathed like a living lung. 6 days of Cora Halliwell rising every 3 hours to feed the fire. On the morning of the 7th day, the wind stopped. She woke to silence. She thought, for a moment, she had died in the night. Then she heard a chickadee. One small bird. Somewhere out in the frozen poplars. Making the small sound a chickadee makes when it has survived a thing. She opened the door. The world was white. But still. The sun was coming up. The sky was the pale blue of a robin's egg after a storm. Every branch was sheathed in ice, and it caught the light and threw it back in a million pieces. And in the snow, 20 yards from her door, was a set of tracks. Silas. He had come during the storm. He had gotten as close as he could. And when he could not reach the door, he had left something on top of the snow. A canvas bundle. A sack of dried hickory chips. 2 rabbits, already field-dressed and frozen hard. And a folded scrap of paper tucked under the string. Cora unfolded it with numb fingers. 4 words. Still here. So are you. She stood in the doorway of her stone house, and she laughed. Once. Out loud. A short, surprised bark of a laugh that made the chickadee stop and listen. Then she went inside. She built up the fire. She skinned the rabbits. She lived. The road stayed closed for 8 more days. Second storm on the 9th. Third storm on the 14th. The snow got deeper, then hardened, then got deeper again. Cora rationed the hickory. She wrote in her Bible margins, because she had run out of anything else to do with her hands. She spoke out loud to Winifred once every morning, as if Winifred could hear. "Winnie, the bacon is holding. Winnie, the stove is drawing. Winnie, I miss you." Silas managed to reach the yard twice more. He never came inside. He left venison on the flagstone step. He left a folded scrap of paper each time. "Still here. Still here." That was all a person needed to say in a winter like that. On the 2nd of February the sky broke. The sun came out. The snow began to soften, just a little at midday. Pearl Denniston came up the ridge on foot, with a hand sled, hauling a bag of cornmeal he had promised her in November. When he reached her yard he stopped at the edge of the trees, and he took off his hat. Which was not a thing Pearl Denniston normally did. Cora came out onto the flagstone step. "Mr. Denniston." "Mrs. Halliwell." His face was chapped and red from the snow. His eyes would not meet hers. He said, "Ma'am, I have a piece of news to give you, and I do not want to give it. But I would rather you heard it from me than from a stranger." She knew. Before he said it, she knew. Because there is a way a man of 59 who has already buried a wife and 2 daughters holds his hat when he is bringing another woman to death. She said, "Winnie." He nodded. "When?" "They think the 28th of January. Her nephew Ambrose went out from Bean Station on the first day the road opened. Found her in her chair by the stove. She had gone to sleep, Mrs. Halliwell. She had a quilt over her. She had her Bible in her lap. She had not suffered." Ambrose said her face was peaceful. He wanted you to know that. He said tell you her face was peaceful. Cora stood on the flagstone step. She did not move. She did not cry. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Denniston. Will you have coffee?" "Yes, ma'am. I would." She brought him coffee. He drank it standing in her yard. He set the empty cup on the flagstone step. He said, "The service is tomorrow, at the Richland Creek Baptist, 10 in the morning. If you can get down, Reverend Thornbury said to tell you. I will be there." "Yes, ma'am." He touched his hat. He turned. He started back down the ridge with his empty sled. Cora went inside her stone house. She closed the oak door. She sat down on the flagstone floor in front of the firebox. And then she cried. Not the way she had cried in the boarding-house room in Bean Station in September. That had been a small, dignified crying. A crying with a closed mouth. This crying had no dignity in it. This crying came up from a place in her chest she had not known she had. Because Winifred Blackwood had walked into a church pew in September and had reached across 2 feet of wood and had held her hand under the pew. Because Winifred Blackwood had walked 8 miles at 71 with a pork shoulder on her back. Because Winifred Blackwood had said, "You are teaching at Patience," and had meant Cora, not the meat. Because Winifred Blackwood had been the only mother Cora had known, since her real mother had died in a Kentucky bedroom in 1881. And now Winifred Blackwood was gone, and Cora Halliwell was alone. Except she was not alone, because the smokehouse walls held, and Silas's tracks were still visible in the yard from a week ago. And Pearl Denniston had walked 5 miles through the snow to tell her before a stranger did. But it did not feel like enough. For a long hour, on the 2nd of February, 1894, it did not feel like enough. She walked down for the service. 5 miles. In borrowed boots 2 sizes too big, tied with rag strips over 3 pairs of stockings. Wearing her gray dress under her wool shawl under a canvas coat Silas had left in the lintel without asking. Her hair pinned tight under her mother's black bonnet, which she had not worn since the funeral it had been made for, in Kentucky, 13 years before. The church was full. Not standing room. Full. Every pew. Every corner. Every doorway. There were people Cora did not know, and had never seen. There were old men, with white beards holding their hats in both hands. There were women in black dresses that had been let out, and taken in, and let out again for 30 years' worth of funerals. There were children, thin, quiet, snow-bitten children, standing between their mothers, staring at the pine coffin at the front of the church. Winifred Blackwood, at 71, had known everyone. Cora had not understood that. Cora slipped into the back pew. Otis Wyeth was there. He nodded to her. Barnabas Crim was there. He did not nod, but he saw her, and something in his face acknowledged her. Coleman Weatherby was there in a black coat that fit him 20 pounds ago. Reverend Thornbury preached from the 23rd Psalm. Because there was nothing else to say, he said, Winifred Blackwood was a woman who kept a promise. She made a promise to the Lord when her husband died in 1855, and she kept that promise for 39 years, and I have not heard of many promises in this county held that long. Amen. The congregation said amen. Cora did not, because she was thinking, I know what promise you mean, Reverend. She made it about me. And she did not know it would be me. But she made it about me. 39 years before I was born. She said to God, if I ever see another woman in that boat, I will tell her. And on the 14th of September, 1892, she told me. That was the promise. And I was the payment. The pallbearers carried Winifred out into the churchyard. Cora followed at the back of the crowd. They lowered the pine coffin into a grave that had been dug with pickaxes because the ground was frozen a foot down. Ambrose Blackwood, Winnie's nephew, threw the first shovel of dark red clay. Cora threw the second. She did not know she was going to. She had not been asked. But when the shovel came around, her hand took it, and she lifted a spadeful of the frozen Tennessee ground, and she let it fall on the pine lid. And it made a sound, the sound a small door makes when it is closing. She handed the shovel to the next person. She walked away out of the churchyard, up the Richland Creek Road, before the graveside prayer was finished, because she could not stand there any more, because she had 5 miles to walk before dark, and because she had noticed on the walk down that morning the 7 houses. 7 houses. Between the church and the ridge along the Richland Creek Road, there were 7 farmhouses that had no smoke coming out of their chimneys. On the 2nd of February, in the coldest winter Grainger County had seen in 20 years. Cora had passed them that morning on the way down, and she had told herself they were burning coal, or they were burning small fires, or the smoke was thin, and she could not see it in the sun. She had told herself that because the truth was worse. The truth was 7 families out of firewood, or 7 families out of the strength to cut firewood, or 7 families in which the man was dead, or gone, or sick, and the woman was doing arithmetic that had no good answer. She walked back up the road at 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already low behind the poplars. She passed the first house. No smoke. She passed the second. No smoke. The third. No smoke. She stopped in front of the fourth. It was the Hawkins place. Del Hawkins had died of a fall from a barn roof in October. His wife Mabel was inside with 4 children. Cora had heard about it from Winnie in November. Cora stood on the road. She stared at the cold chimney, and she heard, from inside the small unpainted house, the thin high crying of an infant. very quiet, very tired. The crying of a baby who was not crying because it was hungry now. It was crying because it had been hungry for a long time and had almost given up on being answered. Cora did not go to the door because she had nothing in her hands. She had walked to the funeral with nothing but her mother's bonnet. She walked on, past the 5th house. No smoke. Past the 6th. No smoke. Past the 7th. The Bickerstaff place. Cliff Bickerstaff and his wife Junie, and 3 children under 9. No smoke. At the 7th house, she stopped again. She looked back down the road at all 7 cold chimneys, lined up along the Richland Creek in the gray-blue winter dusk. And she thought about her lean-to. She thought about the ham hanging in the north corner. 12 pounds ready. She thought about the 2 shoulders next to it. 16 pounds between them. She thought about the bacon slab, and the 4 smoked hocks, and the 3/4 of venison Silas had brought her in December. She thought about the 6 mason jars of rendered lard on her west shelf, gold and clean, and ready to burn in a lamp or to fry a cornmeal cake. She thought about the strings of dried beans hanging from the beams, and the crock of pickled cabbage in the corner, and the bag of cornmeal Pearl Denniston had brought that morning. She had enough for herself. She had more than enough for herself. She had enough for herself and 7 families. If she was willing to run out in March. She stood in the road in the dusk, and she asked herself the question every woman who has ever had a little something and known someone with nothing has asked herself. Am I willing to run out in March? She looked at the 7 chimneys. She thought about the Hawkins baby. She thought, I do not know if I am willing to run out in March. But I know I am not willing to have that baby's crying in my head for the rest of my life. Not to save a shoulder of pork. She started walking again, fast, because the light was going, and she had a plan to make, and a preacher to visit, and a town elder to visit, and a lean-to to empty. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the middle of her flagstone floor, with a lamp burning and a sheet of brown paper on her knee, and she counted her stores. 32 pounds of smoked pork, not counting what she had promised Otis Wyeth for Saturday. 14 pounds of smoked venison. 6 jars of rendered lard. 2 pounds of dried beans. A bag of cornmeal. Half a crock of pickled cabbage. Enough salt to last until April. She wrote it all down on the brown paper in the careful hand her aunt had taught her when she was 10. Then she wrote at the bottom, enough for 7 families. 2 weeks each. 14 weeks total. If they stretch, if they trust me, I will run out in March. I will smoke more in April. I will live. She underlined the last 2 words. She folded the brown paper into 8ths. She put it in her Bible. She banked the fire. And she lay down on the sleeping platform and stared up at the oak beams that were black with 40 years of somebody else's smoke, and she said, out loud, to the beams, Winnie, if you are watching, I am about to do something foolish. And I would like you to know that I know it is foolish. And I am doing it anyway. And I hope that is not too disrespectful of your memory. Then she thought about it. Then she said, on second thought, I do not think you would call it foolish. Then she thought about it. On third thought, I think you would call it about time. She rolled onto her side. She closed her eyes. She slept. At sunrise on the 4th of February, Reverend Elias Thornbury and Coleman Weatherby came up the ridge together. They did not know they were coming up together. Coleman had come at first light on his big roan, because he had spent a sleepless night thinking about the Hawkins baby and about Cliff Bickerstaff's oldest boy, who had been staggering when he walked to the stove for water on Sunday. Reverend Thornbury had come because he had preached over Winifred Blackwood the day before. And when he had gone home to the parsonage, after the burial, he had knelt in front of his own cold stove, and he had asked the Lord to give him a piece of work for the morning. And when he had risen, he had known the work was on the ridge. They met at the last bend in the road. They looked at each other. Neither said anything. Neither needed to. They rode into the yard side by side. Cora was in the lean-to. She was standing on a wooden box, taking down a ham from a beam hook. She had heard the horses. She did not turn. She said, over her shoulder, "Reverend, Mr. Weatherby, I am glad you came." Coleman Weatherby said, "You knew we were coming." She turned. She stepped down from the box. The ham in her arms was 12 pounds, dark, aromatic, hard cured to keep. She said, "I did not know you were coming. I knew somebody was coming, because I sent a boy down at first light." "What boy?" "Amos Denniston, Pearl's grandson. He walked past the ridge yesterday afternoon on his way to his aunt's house. I paid him a nickel to stop at the parsonage and the Weatherby place on his way home this morning." The two men looked at each other. Reverend Thornbury said mildly, "Nobody has knocked at my door this morning." Coleman Weatherby said, "Nor mine." Cora looked at them. She looked at the ham. She looked at the two men on the two horses. She said, "Well, then the Lord was ahead of the nickel." Reverend Thornbury laughed. Once. Out loud. The kind of laugh a 58-year-old preacher does not laugh often. He dismounted. He came into the yard. He looked at Cora, and at the ham, and at the lean-to behind her, at the shoulders, and the bacon, and the venison, and the jars of lard on the west shelf visible through the open door. He said quietly, "Mrs. Halliwell, how much can you spare?" Cora said, 32 pounds of pork, 14 of venison, 6 jars of lard, 2 pounds of dried beans, and I would like to give it to 7 families, 2 weeks' worth each, starting with the Hawkins baby." Coleman Weatherby, still on his big roan, said, "I brought a ham. I can bring 3 more." Reverend Thornbury said, "I can bring 2. Cora said, "Then we can feed 9. And I have a list of 9. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the folded brown paper. Coleman Weatherby dismounted. Slowly. He was 64, and it was 5 degrees outside. He walked into the yard. He said, "Mrs. Halliwell, what do you want for it?" She did not understand the question. "What do I want?" "For the food." "What are you charging?" "Charging." "Yes." "What are you charging?" "I will pay it." "So will the Reverend." "So will anyone I ask, in cash, before nightfall." "What is the price?" Cora looked at him. She looked at Reverend Thornbury. She looked at the lean-to behind her. She looked at the road that led down to the 7 coal chimneys. She looked back at Coleman Weatherby. And she said, in the voice that would be repeated in every kitchen and every barn and every church pew in Grainger County for the next 60 years, "Because what I ought to have been given, I was not given." She stopped. She swallowed. She said, "So I will give it to them." Coleman Weatherby did not move. Reverend Thornbury did not move. For a long moment, no one in the yard moved. Then Reverend Thornbury took off his hat. He held it against his chest. He said very quietly, "Mrs. Halliwell, whose daughter are you?" Cora looked at him. She said, "That is the second time somebody has asked me that in this yard, and I still do not know." Coleman Weatherby said, in a voice like gravel, "Well, whoever she was somebody." They loaded the ham onto Coleman's horse, and the 2 shoulders onto Reverend Thornbury's saddle. and Cora tied a sack of dried beans and 2 jars of lard to the Reverend cinch, and she wrapped a bundle of smoked bacon in canvas for Coleman to take to the Hawkins place first. Because the baby? She stood in the yard, and she watched the 2 men ride down the ridge road. She stood there until she could not see them any more. Then she went back inside her stone house. She sat down on the flagstone floor, and she did not feel like a hero. She did not feel like a saint. She did not even feel especially kind. She felt like a woman who had eaten breakfast and who had a warm house, and who could not have gone on eating breakfast in a warm house, while there was a baby on the road below her who was cold and hungry. That was all. That was the whole thing. Sunday morning, 5 days later, the Richland Creek Baptist Church was full. Not the way it had been full for Winifred's funeral. Fuller. Every pew. Every wall. Cora Halliwell was not there. She was in the lean-to on the ridge, tending a small fire under his shoulder that would be ready by Wednesday. Reverend Elias Thornbury took the pulpit. He opened his Bible. He did not read from it. He closed it. He looked out at his congregation. He said, "On Thursday morning, I rode up to the Ashbury Ridge with Mr. Weatherby. There is a woman living up there. Some of you know her. Some of you do not. Her name is Mrs. Halliwell. Cora Halliwell. She is 22 years old. She came up onto that ridge in September with $3.13 and a cast iron skillet. And she has rebuilt a smokehouse that our father said would not stand another winter." He paused. On Thursday she gave away 32 pounds of pork, 14 of venison, 6 jars of lard, 2 pounds of dried beans. She gave it to 9 families. Some of you are sitting in those families right now. A soft sound moved through the congregation. Not a word. A movement of breath. I asked her what she wanted for it. She said she did not want anything. I asked her why she was giving it away when she could sell it. She said this. He stopped. He said, she said, because what I ought to have been given, I was not given. So I will give it to them. And then Reverend Elias Thornbury did not say anything else. He stood in his pulpit. He looked at his congregation, and he was quiet, not for 1 second, not for 2, 11 seconds, 11 seconds of silence in a full church, which is not a thing that happens, which is not a thing that a preacher does, which is not a thing a congregation permits. But nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody rustled a Bible. For 11 whole seconds, the Richland Creek Baptist Church was as quiet as the inside of a stone smokehouse in a snowstorm. And in that silence, 3 grown men wept openly. Coleman Weatherby was one of them. Barnabas Crim was another. Otis Wyeth was the third. And in that silence, a woman named Mabel Hawkins, holding her infant daughter, closed her eyes, and did not open them for a long time. Then Reverend Thornbury said, "Amen," and the congregation said, "Amen." After that Sunday, the smokehouse was never empty. Not of visitors. Not of gifts. Not of small quiet acts that nobody explained. Otis Wyeth came up the ridge on the Tuesday, after the sermon, with a glass oil lamp. Proper cut glass base. Clean chimney. A can of good clear kerosene. He set it on her flagstone step and said, "A woman living alone in a stone house should have better light than a tallow candle. Do not thank me." And he walked away. Clarissa Engel came the Thursday, after that with a quilt made of scraps from her 4 daughters' dresses. 11 years' worth of stitching. She said, "I did not know who it was for." "It is for you." Coleman Weatherby brought his son Bobby the following week, and they rebuilt Cora's yard fence. Barnabas Krim came in the middle of March. He rode up alone. He had the little black ledger book from his store under his arm. He said, without preamble, "Mrs. Halliwell, I have been going through my books. Your husband's account with my store is closed. I still owe you $12.40, Mr. Krim." "No, ma'am, you do not." He opened the ledger. He held it out. At the bottom of the page was written, in fresh dark ink, "Paid in full. January 30th, 1894. B. Krim." Cora looked at the date. "January 30th. Mr. Krim, that is 4 days before I gave away the food." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He was quiet. Then he said, "I have not slept well since October. I lay in my bed on the 29th of January, and I thought about that baby in the Hawkins house, and I thought about your face when you set 65 cents on my counter and told me you would bring more every Saturday. And I got up, and I went to my store, and I closed the account. Mr. Krim, I did not do it because you gave the food away, Mrs. Halliwell. I did it 4 days before I knew about the food. I did it because I could not carry it any more." He handed her the ledger. He tipped his hat. He rode down the ridge. And Cora Halliwell sat on her flagstone step, with a merchant's ledger in her lap, and she understood something she would carry the rest of her life. That when a person puts down a shame, they do not always put it down for the reason you would guess. Sometimes they put it down because the weight had finally moved past what a body could carry. And that mattered, even when it was not, in the end, about her. At the end of March a young woman came up the ridge. Cora saw her from the yard. She was coming slowly, picking her way over the mud where the road had softened. Small, thin under her coat, except she was not thin. Her coat did not close in the front. She was carrying a small carpet bag. She stopped at the edge of the trees. She stood there. Cora looked at her. And Cora Halliwell, 22 years old, in the yard of her smokehouse in the last week of March 1894, felt the ground under her feet stop being ground for a moment and become water. Because the young woman at the edge of the trees was Della Marsh, 24 years old, 7 months gone with child. Alone. Silas Renwick was in the yard. He had been splitting kindling. He stopped. He set the axe down. He looked at the woman at the edge of the trees. He looked at Cora. He said, very quietly, "You do not owe her a thing, Cora." Cora did not answer. She was watching Della Marsh, who was standing at the edge of her yard, holding her carpet bag with both hands, not moving. Della's face was thinner than Cora remembered. Della's coat was one Cora recognized. It had been Ezra's. Della's shoes were split at the toe. Della said, in a voice that barely carried, "Mrs. Halliwell." Cora did not answer. Della said, "I know I do not deserve to be here. I know it. Ezra left me in December. I have been in Chattanooga 4 months. My father will not open the door to me. My aunt in Kentucky told me to try you." Cora blinked. "Your aunt. She was your friend. In the boarding house. Peggy Loomis." Cora closed her eyes. Peggy Loomis, who had brought her the newspaper, who had stood on the porch and pressed her lips together. Peggy Loomis was Della Marsh's aunt. The world was not big. It was very small. It had never been big. Della said, "I am not asking to stay. I know I cannot stay. I am asking only to sleep one night under your lintel roof, because the road is muddy, and I cannot walk any more today. And in the morning I will go." Cora opened her eyes. She looked at Della. She looked at the belly. She looked at Silas, who was watching her without moving, without opinion in his face. She looked at the door of her stone house. She heard in her own chest the voice of Winifred Blackwood, dead now for 2 months, saying, "This is not the place where you are hiding, child. This is the place where you begin." And she thought, Winnie, if I turn her away, then Ezra wins. He turned me into a woman who could be discarded. He turned her into a woman who could be discarded. If I close this door on her, I close it on myself. Because there is no difference between us in this yard except the difference between a warm house and a cold road. And I know that difference. I know it too well. Cora said. "Come inside." Della's face broke. "Mrs. Halliwell, come inside, Della Marsh. And do not sleep under the lintel roof. You sleep on the platform. And you do not go anywhere in the morning. You stay here until that baby is born." Della sat down in the mud. Just sat down. Right where she was standing. Because her knees had decided, without asking her, that they were done for the day. Cora walked across the yard. She helped her up. She walked her inside the stone house. And Silas Renwick stood in the yard, with the axe at his feet, and watched a woman he loved bring another woman inside a house he himself had never crossed the threshold of. And when Cora came back out onto the flagstone step an hour later, after she had put Della to bed on the sleeping platform under the scrap quilt Clarissa Engel had sewn from her daughter's dresses, Silas was still standing there. He said, "Cora." "Silas." "Why?" She looked at him. She said, "Because if I had turned her away, Ezra would have one. He turned me into somebody who could be thrown out. If I threw her out, I would still be somebody he had made. I would still be his. And I will not be his anymore. Not in any way. Not even in the way I say no." Silas Renwick was quiet a long time. Then he said, "That is the strongest thing I have ever heard a person say." She said, "Then it is strong enough to live by." He picked up the axe. He said, "I will bring extra venison tomorrow. There are 2 of her to feed now." He walked into the trees. Della stayed until August. She gave birth on the 21st of June, 1894, on Cora's sleeping platform, under the scrap quilt. Cora caught the baby, with hands that had never caught a baby before but that had, by then, done enough impossible things to trust themselves. It was a girl. Della named her Grace. Grace Halliwell Marsh. Cora said, "You cannot give her my name." Della said, "Yes, I can. And she will know why for the rest of her life." In late August, Della took Grace on the train to Kentucky, to a cousin who had written to say the door was open. Della left the scrap quilt folded on the sleeping platform because she said it belonged to the house, not to her. She left a note on the work. "I do not have words for what you did. Grace will have them. I will teach her. D." Cora kept the note in her Bible for the rest of her life. Ezra Halliwell died in a Knoxville saloon in the summer of 1895. A card game. A knife. A stranger. No one to claim the body. The letter came to the Bean Station post office, and Coleman Weatherby brought it up the ridge himself. Cora took the train to Knoxville. Alone. She paid for a plain pine coffin, and a small plot at the edge of the cemetery, and a stone that said, in the shortest inscription the mason had ever cut, "Ezra Halliwell. 1868, 1895. He taught me I was stronger than I knew." That was not forgiveness. That was accounting. She rode the train home. She walked up the ridge. She did not tell Silas where she had been for 3 days, until he asked. When he asked, she told him. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "That was well done, Cora." She said, It was necessary. It was not well or badly done. It was done, he said. That is the definition of well done, in my experience. The years passed in the way years pass in the hills. Silas Renwick never crossed the threshold of the smokehouse after the winter of the bear trap. Not once. They took their Sunday dinners together on the flagstone step in warm weather, and in the yard under a canvas awning in cold weather. He built her a proper chicken coop in 1897. She mended his coats every October. When people in Bean Station asked what they were to each other, Cora Halliwell said only one thing. He is the brother the Lord sent me late. And that was the whole answer. The smokehouse business grew and then slowly shrank. Cora smoked hams and shoulders for the county for 38 years. She never expanded the building. She never took on help except when Silas offered it. She paid her taxes in cash. She read her Bible at night. She sat in the third pew from the back of the Richland Creek Baptist Church for 52 Sundays a year. Silas Renwick died on the 12th of October, 1921. He was 62 years old. He was splitting kindling in his own yard when his heart stopped. He fell forward against the chopping block, and he did not get up. A boy from a farm nearby found him at sundown. Cora was 51. She walked the 2 miles to his cabin. She sat beside him for 3 hours before anyone else came. She did not weep loudly. She spoke to him. She said, "You go on to Rebecca now. She has been waiting 40 years. That is long enough for anybody to wait." She had him buried under the tulip poplar in her own yard. The same poplar whose roots had once pushed her east wall out of True. She said the roots had earned it. She lived 33 more years after that. In February of 1923, in the middle of the coldest week that had come to Grainger County since 1894, Reverend Thornbury's grandson, a young pastor now, called Ephraim Thornbury, came up the ridge with 2 children in a wagon. A boy of 8 and a girl of 6, Josiah and Miriam Vance. Their parents had died in a wagon overturned on the Chattanooga Pike 3 weeks earlier. There was no next of kin. The county was going to place them separately. A boy in Knoxville. A girl in a Baptist orphanage in Nashville. Ephraim Thornbury said, "Mrs. Halliwell, my grandfather told me a story once about a woman up on this ridge who fed 9 families in a hard winter. He said if I ever knew a child who did not have a place, I should come here first." Cora looked at the 2 children in the wagon. The boy was holding the girl's hand. The girl was staring at the tulip poplar over Silas's grave. Cora said, "Bring them down." She was 53 years old. She raised them in the stone house. Josiah became a preacher. Miriam became a nurse. They never left her. In the fall of 1938, a woman came up the ridge in a small black automobile. She was 44 years old. She wore a schoolteacher's dress, and her hair pinned back the way schoolteachers wore it in that year. She parked the automobile at the edge of the yard, and she got out. Cora was on the flagstone step, snapping beans into a bowl. The woman walked into the yard. She said, "Mrs. Halliwell." Cora looked up. She saw a face that she had never seen before. But she knew the eyes. She knew the eyes because they were Della Marsh's eyes. Cora set down the bowl. The woman said, "My name is Grace Halliwell Marsh. My mother died 10 years ago. All my life, she told me your name. I have been meaning to come, and this year I ran out of reasons to wait." Cora stood up. Slowly. She was 68 years old. She walked across the yard. She looked at Grace. She lifted her hand and touched Grace's cheek. The way a woman touches a face she has known since it was born, though she has not seen it in 44 years. She said, "You have your mother's eyes, child." Grace said, "My mother said I have your hands." Cora looked down at Grace's hands. They were her hands. Long fingers. Square knuckles. A woman's working hands. Cora said, "You have a house here. Do you understand me? This is one of your houses. Come whenever you need to." Grace stayed 3 days. Before she left, she stood in the doorway of the stone house, and she looked at the scrap quilt still hanging over the sleeping platform. Cora had never taken it down. She had only restitched it in places over the years. Grace said quietly, "You saved my mother's life. You saved mine before I was born." Cora said quietly, "No, child. I opened a door. Your mother walked through it on her own 2 feet. And you walked into this yard on your own 2 feet 44 years later. Do not give me credit for a step you took yourself." Grace kissed her forehead. Grace drove away. Cora Halliwell went inside her stone house and sat down on the flagstone floor in the middle of the golden afternoon light through the west window, and she pressed her palms flat against the warm limestone, and she said, out loud, to Winifred Blackwood, to Silas Renwick, to her mother in a Kentucky bedroom in 1881, to Mrs. Ashbury, who had built the Smokehouse in 1848. "All right. I have done what I could do. I hope it was enough." The stones did not answer, but they held the warmth of the afternoon sun for a long, long time after the sun had gone. Cora Halliwell died on the 8th of March, 1954. She was 84 years old. Josiah was with her. He was 39 now, a Baptist pastor at a small church outside Morristown. Miriam was there. She was 37, a nurse in Knoxville, with 3 children of her own, who Cora had held on her lap. Cora was in the bed Silas had built her in 1902. She was under the scrap quilt Clarissa Engel had sewn from her daughter's dresses. Her last words were spoken to Josiah. She said, "Do not sell the house." "No, Mama. Leave it for whoever needs it." "Yes, Mama." Then she closed her eyes. And in the firebox that Silas Renwick had cleaned every October for 30 years, and that Josiah had cleaned every October after that, the coals of Cora Halliwell's last banked fire went slowly, gently cool. The funeral was held at the Richland Creek Baptist Church. Every pew was full. Every wall was lined. Grace Marsh, 60 years old, and a retired schoolteacher, was there in the front pew. Josiah preached his mother's eulogy. He said, "My mother did not build a smokehouse. She built a place where kindness was set into stone. And when we are all gone, the walls will still be here, because that is what she did with her life. She turned bread into stone, and she left the stone for us." He stopped. He said, "Amen." The congregation said, "Amen." The smokehouse still stands. The east wall Cora rebuilt in September of 1892 has not moved a stone. The firebox draws clean. The chimney has not cracked. Josiah Vance had a small bronze plate set into the inside of the south wall in the summer after his mother's funeral. It is placed beside the sleeping platform at eye level for a person sitting on the edge of the bed. The plate reads, "This place belongs to whoever has nowhere else to go." Cora Halliwell, 1870-1954. The door has an oak latch. It closes. It does not lock. It has not locked in 132 years. And on cold mornings in autumn, when the mist rises off Richland Creek and the sun comes through the south window and hits the flagstone floor, the limestone walls still hold the warmth of every fire that was ever built inside them. And the room smells, very faintly, of salt and hickory and the particular kindness of a woman who was given nothing and decided to give everything she had. The fire is warm. Good night.